So, hello, Los Angeles. I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Poured Over, and it is my great good fortune to be with you guys tonight and Rachel Khong on the pub date of Real Americans, the May Barnes & Noble Book Club pick. Rachel, it's so good to see you. How does it feel to have the book out in the world?
It feels amazing. It's been a long road.
I want to start with the title, Real Americans. I'm going to let you explain.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. I'll back you up. I'll help you with this, but...
So originally this book was called New Thing, December 2016. And it was called that for years and years, and I felt increasingly terrible about that fact. Right. At some point, I realized, I think a character said the phrase Real Americans about another character in the book, and I thought, oh, that's the title. That's exactly the title. That's what each of these narrators is grappling with, their sort of status as a real American. And the moment I thought it's called Real Americans, I also thought, oh no, it's too big. Like Americans in the title is too big. And then the word real is so fraught. And I thought, I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I have what it takes to actually write a book called Real Americans. But I kept it because it felt the most fitting. And now it just feels like it couldn't be any other way. Yeah.
So 3 generations of a Chinese American family, 80 years. New York, Seattle, Beijing, a little side trip into Hong Kong before Hong Kong becomes the Hong Kong we know now. I want to start with Lily, not just because you opened the book with Lily, but she may have gotten under my skin in a way that I wasn't expecting. And how many of you have read the book? Okay, right, okay, this is good.
It's kind of amazing.
Lily got under your skin, I bet. Yeah, okay, I'm seeing people nod, yeah, because there was so much of Lily that was really familiar, and then she did a couple of things, and obviously we are spoiler-free in this conversation because, hi, it's the book's pub date, I'm not spoiling this book for you. But Lily makes a couple of decisions that I wasn't expecting her to make. And I'm wondering if she surprised you the way she surprised me.
I really want to know those decisions. Is that spoiler? Is that a spoiler?
So she leaves a situation that some people might not have left.
Yeah.
I think that's where we can go without giving up the goods.
Yeah.
But I wasn't expecting her to be so decisive about it. It's not like she's Ruth from Goodbye Vitamin, right? She's her own woman, but it was a little cold.
Yeah. Yeah, without giving anything away, I mean, I have been thinking about this book as there's 3 different narrators. I don't think that's a spoiler.
No.
Each of these sections of the book is sort of a coming-of-age story. This is very much a novel about how we become who we become.
Right.
All the different factors that go into that. And so Lily is, in the first part, sort of learning who she is, and she's trying out a lot of different things.
Oh, yeah.
And she's making a lot of good decisions, bad decisions. She just makes a lot of decisions, and it's sort of trial and error for her. And so I think when she makes her final sort of decisive decision, that's like true to her. That's what she's sort of like sort of changing into the person who could make that really firm decision, let's say, for herself and loved ones.
So I'm going to dance around a little bit. We meet her son and we meet her mom, and I think that'll give you guys enough to anchor into if you haven't read the book yet. And in their own ways, there's a like all families have this, right? Like you meet, step aside from your own family for 2 seconds, right? You meet anyone's family and you're like, oh yeah, you guys are related. Right? Like I have cousins that I only see a couple times a year, and I promise you, if they were sitting, you would know that we're related. And
My
I
family
feel
is sitting here.
Yeah.
You
okay.
could see them.
So, all right, you know exactly what I'm talking about then. Like, there's that through line. And Nick, even though he's half Chinese, is blonde and blue-eyed. And it wouldn't be the first time that a halfie has shown up and looked much more Anglo than not. But it's a really interesting storytelling decision. And it puts him in spaces that he might not otherwise have access to. But it also creates a little bit of conflict. So, Nick, born Nico.
Yeah.
Did you know that's what he had to be? Who he had to be?
Yeah, it's weird. Each of these characters came to me very fully formed. I knew who they were, but I didn't necessarily know how they got to be who they were, which does sound nuts in retrospect because there's so much that it's like it's a very puzzly book, you know, there's pieces that you're putting together. And so it's weird in retrospect that I didn't know what was going on, but I really didn't know. I just knew he had this, he appeared one way and he felt a totally different way and was a different way.
Right.
And I think his story is interesting because it sort of reflects maybe a feeling that I've had as an Asian American, you know, the sense that I am fully American. I've been in America since I was 2 years old, and that's what I feel like. I don't belong in Malaysia, which is where my family's from.
Right.
But people still ask me, where are you really from?
That's a question that drives me around the bend because born in Boston, literally born in Boston, really,
Yeah, and I feel a certain way, but I don't, that's not how I'm seen. And I think each of the characters in this book are different from how they appear. You know, people really come to them with a lot of preconceived ideas, thinking, oh, I know who you are. You're just some white guy, approaching Nick. And he wants to say, no, I'm actually half Chinese. I have a Chinese mom. I feel half Chinese. I speak Chinese. I don't know why you're treating me this way. And of course, it's sort of obvious why they're treating him this way. It's like, I think the way we look has so much currency in America. It's just sort of this way that we relate to each other and not always, not often for anyone's benefit.
Nick's grandmother, Lily's mother, May, she and her husband immigrate to the United States from China and don't speak Chinese. They stop speaking Chinese, and you'll find out why. But straight up stop speaking Chinese, and they only speak English going forward. And I thought that was a great choice because that would be surprising for more readers than not. Yeah,
it surprised me. Your earlier question, at every turn, all of the characters really surprised me. I think that those characters that you mentioned, they want so badly to just be viewed as Americans, and it's sort of impossible for them. For as good as their English is, and May's gets quite good, she's never really fully viewed that way.
But everyone's living in liminal space. You've written a novel about liminal space. And there were moments where I was just absolutely sure that Lily was in on it more than maybe Nick or May. That she's in this just... Because we're going to get to the money part. We're going to get to you give us a little jump in time and we get to meet Nick as an adult. And I'm like, oh, this is not what I was thinking he would turn out to be. And May is just this kind of steady pulse behind both of them. And they don't know what to do with her. They genuinely don't know what to do with her, but all three of them are living in liminal space that doesn't really overlap, even though they're family.
Yeah, I mean, that's the eternally interesting question to me is how can a family, and a lot of my family is here tonight, I mean, how can families who are from the same, we have the same genetics, similar genetics, right? We're from the same sort of lineage. We live in the same house for so many years. How is there so much misunderstanding, miscommunication? My parents are both civil engineers, and they definitely didn't understand writing until I forced them to understand it. I think that's something that I'm just perpetually interested in, just being in these relationships with other human beings and still finding one another like a mystery, essentially.
Well, finding your family members mystery too, but they're also, in weird ways, staying separate from community.
Yeah.
And that isolation, you made my heart hurt a little bit for them, because not being able to build community. May isn't able to translate a lot of her life. Lily just steps back from the world in a way that feels like it takes a lot more energy than it would be to just live in a suburb somewhere.
Yeah.
And Nick is just mad. He's mad at everyone. He is just ferociously mad at everyone. And that isolation and that insecurity and all of the stuff that they put themselves through, that they could have... Did you really mean to put them all in a pot of boiling water and just say, okay, let's see what happens? Pardon the cooking metaphor.
I mean, I think that's unfortunately for my characters, that makes interesting reading and writing. You mentioned May and Charles not speaking Chinese anymore, adopting English. That's another way in which they isolate themselves, right? And they lose sort of their connection to their culture. You know, I mentioned I feel like an American, but I've been questioning a lot of these American myths that I've been raised with, American narratives. And one of them is, you know, individualism and exceptionalism and this belief that you are sort of responsible for your own success and you're pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. When in actuality, the people who are just wildly successful, all the billionaires, they have their networks of billionaires and they're all like giving each other millions of dollars. So that's not actually true.
Right.
But I think it does harm people who believe, okay, I can leave this traumatic past behind, leave it all behind and start anew. And hopefully it'll be better.
Attica Locke has a great line. Did you make good choices or did you have good choices? And that's a huge, huge difference. And that's something your characters bump up against quite a lot, because money and class are not synonymous.
No,
they are not synonymous. And this idea, again, like we have all of this American mythology, and like think about just the mythology of the American West, right? Like go West, young person, make yourself over. I mean, we were actually talking about this in the green room a second ago. But if you've ever been to the Huntington, there's that entire building where it's just filled with paintings from like France and England and New York. And it's kind of like, but we're California. Like I grew up with all of this stuff. What? Why? Like I just, why do, it's hanging in the Met. Like, and yeah, I have the luxury of saying I can go to the Met and see this too, but like we're California.
Yeah.
Why haven't we made a new thing? Why are we still sort of turning back that way and saying, this is the thing we put the most value on?
Yeah. Yeah, I was so interested in that question. Like, what do we value and what lives do we sort of pass over or think are not as worthy of spending time on? And that just, yeah, it's like endlessly interesting.
And what's normal? This is a question Nick asks a lot. And I understand where the kid's coming from. I absolutely understand where he's coming from. But he holds on to that well into, let's call it his late 20s, early 30s-ish. I mean, he holds on to that. Like, what's normal? He's still measuring himself against all of these other people where you're like, guy, you actually have figured out a pretty interesting life. And yet you keep turning outside.
Yeah. I think that's also something that's so pervasive in this American culture, right? This idea that there's a homogenous ideal, that there's like one way to be, which is just like incredibly wealthy and hopefully attractive. And yeah, I think that's just a really, I don't know, that disappoints me. I just want the world to be different. I want it to be more inclusive and like not just paying lip service to diversity, but actually championing it and believing that it matters.
But diversity isn't just skin color. It isn't just gender. I mean, diversity is also class, it's experience, it's age, it's a million different things. I mean, if we really want to be exceptional, in my way of thinking, is that we pull from everywhere.
Yeah.
Right? Like everyone gets a seat at the table. And that is still an idea that's really shocking to people. in ways where I'm kind of like, it's 2024, right? Like, it's the 21st century. Can we try something different? Because the technical definition of insanity is doing the same thing over again and expecting a different result. And it's like, hi, that didn't really float the first time. And then you take all of this humanity and all of these fabulous characters, and we're only telling you about 3 of them. And then you pull in a lot of science. I was not a science kid.
I wasn't either.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about the research for a second, because I had to make I'm hoping it's actually in my notes, but epigeneal something. I didn't actually write it down. I just remember the epigeneal part. But, I mean, we're talking about DNA. We're talking about genetic sequencing. We're talking about stuff that you don't necessarily pick up just skimming through the LA Times or the New York Times on a Sunday.
Yeah. Why?
Yeah.
Is that your question?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think I was not a science kid, as you were not, in terms of doing well in school at science. And I also just want to shout out really quickly my high school English teachers here.
Oh,
Mr.
thank you.
Desmond, which makes me so happy. I haven't seen him since high school. It's incredible. Anyway, I was bad at science. I was really bad at science.
Okay.
But I think the amazing thing about being a writer is that you get to be interested in things and not be graded for them.
Right.
So I think I've always been really interested in biology, just not technically good at it in terms of grades. Right. And this question of like, why do we become who we become? There's choices that we made, choices that we had. Right. There's all of these factors. And I think genetics is just so interesting to me, especially as things like 23andMe, right? These tests that can tell you with very little friction, you just need some spit. You can find out whether you're like 1%, whatever. It's so accessible, and people are finding all sorts of data out about themselves, but that doesn't necessarily tell us about who we actually are, I guess. And so science to me was something that was interesting. Yeah, just something I never really thought I could really, feel. I mean, I felt really nervous writing this book. There's a lot of science in it, but and I felt like, who am I to write this book that has science in it? In the same way that I felt, who am I to write this book? I'm not a real Chinese person. I'm not a real, like X whatever.
Okay. I understand. I mean? Yeah, it's wild hearing those words come out of your mouth, because, I'm part Taiwanese, and people have feelings about that. And I'm like, no, really, I'm not Chinese. I promise you, I'm part Taiwanese. But I'm also part Japanese. Yeah. Hello, colonialism. Like, and then my dad's a white guy from Jersey. But I am ultimately, a Bostonian living in exile. Yeah. Right? But real Chinese, it just never would have occurred to me. I'm like, well, yeah, you're Asian American, but you're American first.
I'm American first, but there's a portion, this is a Chinese family, so I worried about that. The science I worried about. But I think I just let my curiosity win out, honestly. Like, I thought, this is what I want to write about. I'm curious about these characters. I'm curious about these subjects. Science is fascinating to me, even if I'm stupid at it, whatever. And so I really did just read a bunch of stuff. I read a lot of articles. I talked to a lot of people who were smarter than me for so many years, asking them incredibly dumb questions year after year. Like, I cannot stress that enough. They were so dumb. I asked them questions before I knew what the story even fundamentally was. Like, I did the research, and then that sort of shaped the story.
I love hearing that part, because to me, DNA is a language. Like, science is a language, right? Mathematics is a language. Science is a language. There's this theory that if you're good at math/science, then language and music follow. And I love the idea that you're overlaying this human piece with the tech that, in some ways we're supposed to embrace, right? Like, who doesn't want to live longer? Who doesn't want to have a better quality of life? And then there are all these ethical questions that come with it. And not everyone wants to have the conversation about the ethics piece. And you really do, without giving anything away, you do get into that. And I think it's that balance of humanity and compassion for your characters, even when they do stuff where I'm like, really? Okay, fine. I got very invested in this book. But that you can have both, right? That it isn't just about the big beating heart. It's also like, well, what do you do?
Yeah.
What happens next?
I think there's no other way to sort of come at those really big ethical questions. What should we be doing in science? I don't know, just like more broadly, this is a book about, I think, often people making decisions for other people without having the other person's full context.
Right.
And that's also true of, science more broadly, right? Like, who is getting to make decisions about humanity, essentially, going into the future. And I guess I just wanted to lodge this small protest. Like, I don't think it should be driven by capitalism. Just my thought. Yeah.
Legitimate thought. But you also have a really great line that I'm going to quote for a second. Science required a sense of openness to being wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of being a writer. That's kind of being a human on the planet. I mean, we've got to be willing to be wrong. And I've just never heard science described in exactly that line. It's always, we're charting new territory. We're cutting, we're breaking to the future. We're reinventing, all this stuff. And I'm like, but the tech piece is only as good as the humans that are making it. And we're still human. And like, obviously lots of conversations about AI right now, and I have many, many feelings, and we're not going to have that conversation now. But you never lose sight of your character's humanity, and I don't think you always agree with what they're doing.
No.
I'm pretty sure that there are moments where you're like, I don't know what just happened here, but this happened. Mapping out the story, though, because it's clear you are one of these people who will rewrite a sentence until you get what you want. I also have known your editor for quite some time, and I know that's also his style. So it's like, you're working the text until you get the world that you want, but a lot happens. A lot happens, and this book is twice as long as Goodbye Vitamin. The structure is really different. So what did you learn writing Goodbye Vitamin that you used for The Real Americans?
Oh, wow. It is twice as long. It looks really different. I think the main thing was that I knew that I didn't want to write the same book twice. There was no way that I was going to do that. I was just a different person, I think, when I wrote Goodbye Vitamin. And this book just had to have a completely different effort. I think that what I learned and what I learned from writing in general is how to be patient and how to have faith. There were a lot of just dark nights of the soul. And I think, there's just like a lot of faith involved in terms of like believing that you'll one day somehow pull out of it. Okay. You mentioned like science and like being open to being wrong, science and writing. I love that you brought those two things together because you could also, like, some people believe the total opposite, right? Some people believe like you need to know what you're writing about. You need to know what you're doing when you're writing, when you do science, whatever. But I just disagree. Like, I think it's better to know nothing. And I think it's better to sort of go into things with a sense of like openness and curiosity about what you might find. And that's like a more interesting experience to me as a writer.
Okay, I'm going to follow that up with an audience question.
Okay.
Love the structure of the book. Did it come to you early on, and did it ever change? So just for those of you who haven't seen the book yet, it's told, Lily narrates the first section, Nick narrates the second, and we meet May sort of more thoroughly in the end. But each section really has short chapters. Like I felt like you'd written a literary page turner.
Thank you for saying so. It always had this form. Yeah, it always had the three characters in the order that they appear. It's not chronological. And
she does some cool stuff with time.
Yes, there's some time
How's
stuff.
That?
Yeah.
She does some cool stuff with time. We're going to go there.
But these characters appeared in the order that they appear, and they came to me in their first few pages with the voices that they had. And so I knew that much. Like, that was my scaffolding, but I didn't know anything else, and I didn't know how stuff was going to end and everything in the middle. So I'm not like an outline person. I'm just a spelunk in the dark person.
You're pantsing it.
Yes.
You're pantsing it.
Yes.
Okay.
Pants is generous. Yeah.
But memory runs between both books, right?
Yes,
you have a fascination with memory that I kind of share. Because the idea that you can be in the same space with another human being, and especially if you have siblings, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But to be able to remember a moment sort of the same way as the person sitting next to you, right? Or you're literally, I mean, I have a younger brother who has told me stories, and I'm like, dude, what? He's like, you were sitting right there. I'm like, what? And there's a lot
Yeah.
of that, obviously, in Goodbye Vitamin, but not just with Dad. I mean, it's other family members
Yeah.
as well. I mean, it's Ruth in conjunction, with friends and whatnot. And of course, memory here plays a huge role. But you want to talk about memory for a second? You want to talk about what memory means for you and why you keep playing with it in your books?
Yeah, I think it's like you said, it's so interesting that you can experience the same thing as another person. I can remember this live podcast taping and remember things different from Miwa does.
Right.
And that to me is so mind-blowing and I think initially distressing. It's like, what do we have? What do we actually have to work with in order to connect? But I think as I get older, it feels like that makes it more precious somehow. It's like, okay, this is like, who knows what anyone is going to remember? It's all going to come out in the wash. We'll see what happens. But I think the interesting thing to me is that, we can have people together in a room experiencing the same things and just completely different experiences. I think I've always been interested in, with Goodbye Vitamin, and especially with this, the sort of disconnect in memories between a parent and their child. A child has this huge swath of memories that they don't remember from their own childhood, and their parent has access to that. And the same child doesn't know so much about their parents' lives. And so this book really, gets into that.
But also discovering that your parents were people, like that's the moment in childhood where you're like, you weren't just always my parent.
Like maybe you fell in love with someone you weren't supposed to. That seems crazy, but it happens.
But you are also talking about sort of the intersection of luck and fate and fortune and all of these words that people like to pretend don't really exist, right? Like we cloak it in the language of hard work and opportunity and bootstrapping and all of these things, when in fact sometimes it is just pure dumb luck.
Well, that's so American, right? To believe that we're so responsible for our own lives. It's so American. It actually allows us to be in more control, right? It allows us to maybe not be so humble about the fact that our lives are not up to us. It allows us to believe that we're in charge. And I think I was really interested in maybe poking at that a little bit, right? Like that belief that we're so in charge.
So how much of that comes from growing up in the desert? No, really, because I grew up in a place where sitting on a hill, like we're taught to stand on hills and smite people, Boston. No, really. And like from birth, we're taught to do this. But I mean, I get out into the desert here and like everything makes sense, right? Like you can't actually take yourself too seriously in the desert because you might actually kill yourself by accident, right? Like, no, think about it. Like all of those trails at Joshua Tree where they're like, listen, leave a note on your car if you're doing this backcountry thing, which I don't do, by the way. Like, tell us the date you expect to be back.
Yes.
Right. And by the way, we're going to charge you in case we have to come looking for you. But there is something about being out in the desert and being out in that sky, and just you have to think about where you are in the world.
I've never thought about that. I think it's very interesting that you're bringing it up. I think it might be that. I mean, a novel is a sum of so many different things, right? A person is so specific and individual. A novel is just a sort of an extension of that. But I think for me, a big part of it too is the fact that I am an immigrant. I came here when I was 2. I mean, I think I live constantly in this imaginary world, like imagining what if I hadn't left, like what if my parents hadn't left and taken me? Like what if I grew up in Malaysia? Would I be a writer? I don't know. I would definitely have a different accent. Things would be different about my life, and I can't say if they're better or worse. They would be different. But I think because I live in that imaginary sort of speculative space, I'm always thinking like, it's kind of just like it feels like a dice roll in a way. And I think, and I'm constantly thinking too about, maybe related to that is this sort of like immigrant guilt, right? This feeling of like, why do I get to have it luckier? I mean, I think right now I'm thinking there's so much suffering in the world, and why do I get to be on stage here, like talking to you? Like it doesn't seem fair.
Right.
And I think so I think about luck constantly. I don't think this is up to me. This is not all up to me. Some of it, I wrote a book.
Yeah.
So that part I did too.
But but also part of luck to me is building community, right? And being able to turn to your people and say, hey, listen, I can't do this alone, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, publishing a book takes a million different steps with a million different pieces, and selling a book takes a million different pieces. And just all of us come together to do this thing, right? And you've always been a community builder. I mean, from sort of minute one, and certainly everyone knows the Ruby in San Francisco, right? Like that, when I think about what you did there and the community that you were able to build for writers and artists, I mean, that's not a small thing, but that to me seems like the response to if Nick and Lily had been able to take their loneliness and their insecurity and the stuff that made them itch, right? Like if they could figure out a way to build community.
Yeah.
Some stuff would have been easier for them.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, I feel like they could have found some friends. They could have just had a nice meal, just been present with each other.
Right.
It would have been a shorter book.
Oh, no, we don't want that. No. We don't want that. We definitely don't want that. You do a lot of reviews and have interviewed many other authors for virtual events for booksellers and publications. What's the virtue of community building as a working writer, and how has this practice influenced your career and your work?
Oh. Well, I think the value is that, I mean, we've just said it. Otherwise, you'd be sad and alone.
Right.
Writing a book is such a long process. I mean, for me, we talked about it. It took 7 years, more or less. And the actual writing, you do have to be alone pretty much. You have to be thinking, you have to be writing words. But I don't know how I would have done it without other people, without community around me, without other writers, and also non-writers, essential, because sometimes writers can get too much in our own heads about the importance of all this. And I think that the writing matters to me, but also just like living my life matters, and the quality of that life matters, and life is just better with other people. And and these like Q&As and stuff, like the events that I do with other people, it's because it's an ecosystem. You always have to, I mean, Miwa's doing this for me now. It's very special. And I also want to shout out Michael, who's here, my publicist, and he's also part of my community. And it's, it takes a whole village, and it's incredible.
Partially too, I mean, when I think about the idea of reading, right? Like, it's not a passive thing that you do, right? There's this idea that you're just kind of hanging out and you're turning pages and whatnot. And it's a really active thing. Yes. Like, you're engaging not just with the voice of the characters, but the general narrative voice. It takes a lot of muscle.
Yes.
To get through it. And it's also, you know what, if you're reading a book and you don't like it, just stop, okay? I see people getting agita about this all over the internet.
Wow,
if it doesn't work for you, just put it down.
No need to leave a bad review.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, and don't tag authors in bad reviews, y'all. Just don't do it.
Close it and walk away.
Yeah, I mean, please, I read so many books where I'm just like, thanks, peace out. There's a reader for you. It is not me. But yeah, it's just this idea that you're just kind of, noodling and sitting quietly, and when in fact your brain is racing.
It's both sides, right? Like, the writing was so, I don't want to overstate how hard it was. I mean, it was also really fun. It was really fun to write as well. But it is a lot of thinking and just believing and a lot of hard work. And so the reading, it's not passive either, right? It's not just watching a TV show. You actually have to co-create this world with the author. And so I do think this is not just for my book, obviously. It's like for all books, like I think it's worth it for you personally as a reader to come to it with generosity and with like a willingness to be collaborative and to change, because I don't know, it's just like a better experience that way. Instead of coming to it like you're like, who gave this person the right?
I also frequently read stuff in manuscript, so I actually have no flap copy or any. I mean,
that's the best. I wish there were no flap
amazing.
copy.
No, it's
no
amazing.
No offense to the people who wrote it. But
no. But well, I've written a lot of flap copy, but there are times where I just need the words on the page and just trust me to get to wherever I need to go with it, and then I will figure out what's going to happen next. But it's really liberating
Yeah.
to just be able to have words on the page, right? And just surprise me. I mean, you kept a food diary, which I'm totally fascinated by, because there are also people who keep diaries of the books that they read, and I've never done that. I can't tell you how many books I read in a year. I can't. None of it.
I do all of it.
Yeah, but no, and I get it. I mean, it works for some people. I live and die by Post-it notes, and so like my entire world is a maypole of Post-it notes, and they don't age well. But do you think that keeping those notes and being able to dip back into your own history has helped you as a writer?
The thing is, I don't really dip back.
Okay.
And I think as I get older, I feel less. We were talking about memory, you know, but like part of the fear was that I would just forget my whole life.
Right.
And I think that as I get older, I feel less precious about it. I feel less like I need to remember every moment. Like I think that the stuff that matters will stick with me more. And I think it's sometimes nice to compare memories, you know, with other people when they're different. I think that it has helped me to write the notes down. I also do like a sort of journaling practice every morning, and I never look back at them. I think that the writing is how I think sometimes, and so that's always, I think, like fruitful, I guess.
I'm laughing as you say that too, because you have a quote from Kierkegaard in the book where we live forward, but we understand backwards. I'm a little guilty of that sometimes. And
nostalgia.
Yeah, well, I mean, nostalgia can get complicated. It's nice to have a reminder that nostalgia is not all that. But influences. Can we talk? I mean, I know Renata Adler was an influence for you. I know Elena Ferrante, certainly Didion. Who am I missing?
Well, I think, you know, I was thinking about influences for different books. So as you say, Renata Adler, I'm thinking, for Goodbye Vitamin,
Without
that was so important. Amy Hempel is one of my favorite writers.
Right.
But for this book, I was thinking about Ishiguro a lot. I was thinking about Ruth Ozeki. And I did think a lot about Ferrante, just like, I love those books. I think she's, lots of people think she's amazing, but I really wanted to, write a book that also felt like it sucked you in for a little while and sort of took you into its world.
So I think this question will probably ping for you a little more than it. I'm going to read it anyway because I want to know the answer, but I
want to know who
idea.
wrote these questions. Also.
Audience people.
Okay.
Have you had a cocktail that's topped the infamous margarita sangria, loved Goodbye Vitamin, and can't wait to enjoy your latest! Exclamation point. I'm going to assume you know the person who wrote that.
No, well, I am on a podcast with some food people, including David Chang and Chris Ying, and it's called Recipe Club.
Okay.
It's basically a book club, but for recipes.
Okay.
So I did bring in a winning recipe. It was a reader-submitted recipe for something called Margarita Sangria.
Okay.
That was a hit. No, nothing ever tops that. It's the best.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know. I mean, I was just like, I'm going to read this and see what happens because I'm reading Greek right now.
Yeah,
I have no idea what any of this means.
Yeah.
Well, you know, we pull from all different places, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you've written music criticism for the Village Voice. You've obviously done quite a lot with food. I miss Lucky Peach. I do miss that magazine. At one point, you were making a distinction between writing fiction and nonfiction. I'm like, no, you're just a writer. It's okay. You'll figure it out.
That was for capitalism.
Yeah, I know. I've been a bookseller for a really long time. What do you think is next?
Oh, well, I actually do know what's next, which is that Knopf is publishing my short story collection.
Okay.
So that is coming out next. But I did start something new that I can't talk about
that's
yet.
fair.
But it's fiction. But maybe also not really.
I'm down.
Is that enticing or
I'm
scary?
totally down.
I don't know.
That is not scary. No.
I'm
That
like,
is
how
not
do
scary.
I give an enticing... No, that's not good. Actually, I take it back.
You know, no. This is what we do. We put real Americans out into the world.
Yeah.
We let people meet Lily and Nick and May and their supporting cast. And then we let them wait for more.
Yes.
That's what we do. So thank you very much, Rachel Khong. Give us 2 seconds to set up the signing piece. I'm Miwa Messer. This is Poured Over. Thank you, Los Angeles.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.